Welcome to the Mad Love Your Life show. I'm Mary D, the Joy Catalyst, here to be your host and transformation guide. Mad Love is about the mad, making a difference, and love is what we serve up to live a delicious life. My intention is to help you spark new ideas, break limiting beliefs, and align with your deepest dreams and desires. Get ready for laughter, inspiration, and finding your inner roar in every show. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you all know that you are in for a treat today, because you may remember me referencing my recent graduation as a certified B3 somatic wellness practitioner, and I received so much value from this course that I had to bring on my teacher and my friend Matthew Cooke to join us today so we can talk about trauma, regulating the nervous system, and dive into the stories that make Matthew one of my more interesting guests. Matthew T Cooke is an executive coach, a facilitator, and a founder with over 15 years of experience helping leaders get more done without burning out. Matthew is a trauma certified practitioner through somatic experiencing and organic intelligence for nervous system health. He received his BS in health promotion with an emphasis in life coaching at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. And after college, he worked for a startup building the Netflix for optimal living. As head of content curation, he worked directly with 200 plus thought leaders on topics ranging from neuroscience to productivity to conscious business to mindfulness and spirituality, health and fitness. But after working 70 plus hour weeks for 4 years, he burned out at just 24 years old. And Matthew's focus now is coaching and training others in learning skills and tools around the nervous system regulation. The body-based breakthrough somatic coaching certification has certified nearly 100 coaches and therapists to be trauma-informed somatic coaches, teaching them the science and tools of nervous system regulation. Matthew has had the privilege of working with iconic leaders from companies from Snapchat to Apple to SpaceX, Google, Disney, Pixar, Abercrombie. As you can tell, these are tiny little names of companies you've probably never heard of. So Matthew, thank you for being alive, and thank you for the work that you bring into the world and share with others. I want to dive right in and kick off with our favorite question of the show, which is, what do you know now that you wish you had known before you got started doing this body of work?
Oh, wow. Thanks so much, Mary D. And just thank you so much for inviting me to be on. I'm super, super honored to be with you and to sit and have this conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I love that question. So what do I wish that I knew before I started this work?
Yeah.
I would say the biggest thing is probably consistency over intensity.
Tell us
I
what that
think the
means.
biggest Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I grew up with is uh, put it off, put it off, put it off, put it off, rush, 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 and then in a huge burst of adrenaline, like go for it, whatever that thing is, whether that's in fitness and health, or that's in relationships, or that's in business. And the thing that I think I've learned over the years is that the nervous system loves consistency. It loves
Mhm.
predictability, reliability. And just like we as humans love other humans who are predictable, reliable, consistent in general. We also like to spice it up, right? We like to have some fun and have a little mix up here and there, but in
Right.
general, consistency is, I think, the biggest thing that I've learned. And I think a lot of people will tell you that too, right? Like wealth uh, building is not sexy. It's doing the
Mhm.
not sexy things over and over and over again. And even relationships built over decades and decades and decades are not through like huge Hallmark movie moments. And those sprinkled throughout are very important, but that it's
Mm.
those consistent ways that we show up and be with ourselves and be with the people around us. So I would say consistency over intensity
I
is
love
probably the
that.
biggest
I
thing.
love that.
Yeah.
It's such a great way to put it, and it's so interesting because I think that oftentimes, I think logically we can say, oh, it's really nice when things are in order. But you're right. Like we I want the people in my life to be consistent and dependable, because it is a little nerve wracking when they're not. When someone says they're
Yeah,
going to do something and then they don't follow through, and then what happens
right.
is you learn your own machine learning, your intelligence
Yeah,
learning says, "Oh, actually, they're not reliable, so let's not count on this, or we're going to be disappointed." And so,
yeah,
I'm imagining that this is also what happens to our nervous system when we are not being consistent in how we also show up because of outliers, right? But people live with this all the time. So let's talk a
yeah.
little bit about that, because I think that that is one of the main reasons, right? We all show up with our own traumas, dysfunctions, addictions, whatever they are. So when those
Mhm.
things show up or are showing up, because I'm sure someone's listening and they're like, "Oh my gosh, that's me. I have a lot going on. My life is chaotic." And it's showing, my if our inner world is a reflection of our outer world and everything is chaotic. Can you talk to us about what is actually happening in the body? And then we'll dive into, like, how does healing happen from those things?
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. Well, my initial thought, I mean, it obviously depends person to person, right? But my initial thought is what one of my teachers, Steve Hoskinson, says is an addiction to intensity. And that many of us have a patterned response that our nervous system, or you could just say like our mind, our like the our way of being in the world, that is sort of patterned unconsciously uh towards the chaos. That there's
Mhm,
something that biologically I get out of that chaos.
mhm,
What I want to say is that for those folks, most of the time it wasn't chosen, it was handed to us. You know, whether it was mom, dad, caregiver, they showed us that growing up in some form or another of chaos. And so that's how we actually learn to survive growing up. We talk about in the nervous system work, we talk about survival strategies. And so
mhm,
sometimes, ironically, as we get older, that becomes maladaptive. It becomes not helpful. But maybe growing up, chaos and actually kind of staying on our toes was something that actually helped us get through the thing, like whatever it
mhm,
was, like any area or moment or era of our growing up.
mhm.
Sometimes the chaos was the thing that actually helped us get through it. So,
Mm,
not to go
got
like
it.
hot and heavy right away with that first.
Yeah. No, hey, we're open to all the things here.
Yeah.
Sometimes we start a little hot and heavy, and that's all right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, and I
Yeah.
I think and I'll tell you what, I like the hot and heavy because there are people who are struggling with the understanding why they are reacting, or why their body always feels like they're in this reactive nature, and they
Yeah.
just don't know why. They don't know why that is. And so I think it's important because I've met people who, these have been my own friends who come from seemingly stable
Mhm.
families growing up and the whole thing. And yet I can see how their nervous system is responding, especially in heightened situations. And I just go, oh, this is really fascinating. Like,
Yeah.
there was a book I was reading earlier this year, and it was called Not What Happened to You, or no, not what's wrong with you, but it's what happened to you. And I thought that's such
Yeah.
a beautiful reframe in the question of, like, it's what was going on, like, what scenario that played out in your mind, right? Because each of us are going to have our own scenario. Even if we grew up in the same household, we could have a totally
Yeah.
different experience of our parents. We could have a totally different experience of the other people around us. So I think that that part is really important, because people often will go, what is wrong with me? Why am I always tense, nervous, la
Yeah.
la 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 la, right? And so it's just that
Mhm.
recognition. And I guess my question to you would be, because this is something that I learned through the work, but I don't know that most people know this, which is,
Yeah.
does a person have to know exactly, precisely what the trauma was in order to experience some healing or relief from it?
Wow, that's such a great question. Sorry, I have a kitty that's jumping up to say hi. No, they actually don't. They actually don't always need to know. And the reason that is because the nervous system works in for lack of a better term, like energy, like how much energy or intensity that a system can hold. And so it's just simply how much energy can my system hold? And so for a lot of us, if we grew up in a household where there was a ton of chaos happening, um, it can be really difficult to hold a lot of intensity. Or sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes we can hold a ton of intensity. And what we actually want is something that's called our window of tolerance. I don't know if this is what you were speaking to, but to look to our essentially what is our capacity, and our goal, especially in somatic coaching when we're working with coaches who want to become certified and learn to speak the language of the body, is to help people spend more and more time in what's called our window of tolerance, or our window of presence would be another name for it, and then ultimately expand that window of tolerance, meaning can I hang out with and be in presence of really intense situations, experiences, uh, and be present? Can I be present
Mm,
in the midst of that? So
mm,
as I'm able to spend more and more time in presence, um, then I have ultimately a more regulated nervous system, which is what has been tossed around a lot. I think like if you're on social media, like nervous system regulation is like a really big thing, and that's simply a byproduct of um, window of tolerance. Yeah.
got it, got it. And so for those people who I think there would be some people that would say, "Okay, well, what if I just remove myself from the situation?" Right? They're just constantly in a state of like, well, if I am triggered or activated by, let's say, birds flying down from the sky, I'm just
Yeah.
gonna walk into the house, right? And so I think
Yeah.
you're gonna get some people that might have that response. And then my
Uh,
question to you is that part really effective? Is that because I would imagine that that's not really healing, or maybe it's a little masking of what's really happening. So what do you say to those folks who just go, "Well, I'm just going to remove myself from the situation?"
That's such a good question, Mary D. I love that. We would call that a strategy. That's a strategy. And like that could work. It really could. What it's doing though is it's diminishing your capacity. It's
Mm,
diminishing your ability to be present with life, and it's a band-aid ultimately for something that maybe needs stitches. And yeah, the goal is something that we call titration in the somatic coaching world, and it's this idea of spending a little bit of time with that thing and then coming back to safety. And then a little bit more time with that thing and then coming back to safety. Because our system can't really, I mean, trauma essentially is too much, too soon, too quick. Too much, too
mm,
soon, too quick. And so it just overwhelms our system in a moment, whether it's a car accident, or a national disaster, like a natural disaster, or an insert trauma that becomes too big for us to handle in a moment. So in order to then repair that, the goal is, can I spend, as some of my teachers will say, like, can I dip my toe in the water of that thing that feels a little uncomfortable, and then come back into safety? And so it's spending that time sort of, another word is pendulation, uh, and coming back and forth between safety and something that's a little activating, like birds flying from the sky. Yeah,
right,
certainly.
right.
And that
Yeah,
could be a thing for some people.
it made me think about this. I wish I could remember the name of this guy because he was some sort of practitioner, or I don't think he even said he was one of those. Like he treated it like he was kind of like a magician in a way. And the whole
Mm,
premise was that people with really big phobias would come to him and say, "Okay, I'm deathly afraid of spiders." And then he
sure.
would slowly introduce them to spiders, and then but in
Yeah.
a safe environment. So he'd put them somewhere where they felt extra safe, but then also
Yeah.
introduce the spider, but then take it away and do it in a way that would also give them a little dose of it so they could get comfortable with it. And I think
Yeah.
that's the same concept, right? Is just getting a little
Totally.
comfortable with it. Now, to your point, I agree with you. I think there's also a little bit of band-aiding that can happen if we just go, well, the birds are outside, I'm going to come inside, because it's
Yeah.
inevitable that wherever we go in the world, there's probably birds. So
Yeah.
learning to be with them is going to be a much better solution than just running
Yeah.
from them every time. Although running may be suitable in those moments where, you're at the beach and suddenly
Yeah.
there's 20 seagulls.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
yeah, and I use birds
Yeah.
because I know that's actually like a really common phobia, and I didn't know that till I
It
got
is.
older, but I was like, "Oh, wow, this is actually a really common thing. People are
Yeah.
terrified of
Yeah.
birds."
Totally. No, I
But
think I
when
think that's so great, Mary. Yeah, because I think the big question is like, does this impede my daily life? Does this
Right,
impede like flourishing for me? Because there are certain things that are so rarely going to happen that like for me to just avoid it, and I can't think of an example at the moment, but if there's like certain cars that I'm particularly scared of, like I don't, if I don't see that car very often, there's a very low likelihood that it's going to really cause an impact. But you're right, like something like birds, you're going to see birds a lot.
right.
And this could extrapolate out, right, to many different metaphors across life. So it's just a more a matter of like, does it impede my daily living?
Yes,
So,
absolutely, absolutely, and I think for a lot of people, that is the case. They do have
yeah.
stuff showing up for them, and it is impeding their daily living, and it
Mhm.
feels like a struggle, and it feels like, "Hey, is there a way out for me?" Is there work for me? Is there something that will work for me that's not talk therapy? Because I think talk therapy is that especially from my generation, talk therapy was like, that was all that was available, and if you did it, you were probably a little bit crazy, and so there used to be a
Yeah.
really bad stigma, whereas I feel like as time has gone on, I'd say over the past maybe 10-ish years, people are much more open to, oh, coaching as a concept, or even a little bit of a like, oh, coaching feels good because I can still open up to them and have a conversation, but they're not necessarily a therapist who's going to diagnose me as X, Y, or Z. And so
Right.
what I really want us to dive into is, how is this different than talk therapy for those that aren't familiar with what somatics are, and
Yeah.
and how it can be beneficial for people. And we are going to go to a very quick commercial break, but when we come back,
Yeah.
we're going to dive into that question, and Matthew is going to fill us in because he's been a phenomenal teacher, and I've really appreciated going through the class, and I just am even more excited about continuing to share this information with our listeners today.
Thanks.
𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐬𝐿, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a six-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐬𝐿, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorich has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk on the BBM Global Network.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So we were talking about the traumas that happen that sometimes we're not even completely aware of, how we get these triggers and activations and how these things show up and life can feel chaotic, and what it means to get our system back into a place where we don't necessarily have to always run from those activations, but can we learn to sit with them, and can we learn to sit with them long enough to where our body recognizes that we're still safe even if that triggering experience or that activating experience is going on. And so we started to dive into somatics. Like, what does that even mean? What is somatic coaching? How is it different than talk therapy? So let's dive in, and for the people that aren't familiar with that, give them like a really quick understanding of what that means.
Totally. Yeah. So the word somatics derives from the Greek somatikos, and which means the living, aware bodily person. And so when it comes to the soma, or like the body mind, we really can't separate the body and the mind. There's a real unification of our thinking, our feeling, our acting, our perceptions, our emotions, and it's really distinct from like that the Descartes view. I think, therefore I am. And it was first coined in the 70s by a gentleman named Thomas Hanna, and he coined this term somatics to sort of signify this like multifaceted field of movement studies, body work, body oriented or body based psychotherapy. And so we're really emphasizing sensation, perception, and experience of the body, and how that plays out in ultimately our behaviors and then our results in the end. So when it comes to the difference in some ways between talk therapy and somatic coaching, what we're really focusing on is what's so interesting, and most people don't know this, Mary D, so I think this is kind of a cool fun fact, is that we are what are called bottom-up beings. So there's top-down, which is talk therapy, which meaning like the mind speaking to the body, right? We're thinking things, we're having a thoughtful conversation. But we are actually bottom-up beings, which means that 80% of the communication in our systems is the body communicating to the brain. 80% is actually the guts, the heart, the lungs, our viscera is constantly giving information, feeding it up to the brain. So there's lots of information that our body's constantly feeding us. And only 20% is the brain to the body, so top down. So it's actually more effective to do therapies where we're focusing on what is the body saying to us, and starting to I like to think of it as kind of like dating the body again. I think so many of us, and I myself included for so many years, are at war. I was at war with my body for so many years. It was like, why is it not doing what I wanted to? And I think that that's one of the biggest distinctions that I find with our clients, and ultimately with our coaches that are working with their clients, is that so many people are wanting to begin to date their bodies again. And I'd even invite everyone who's listening, like, ask yourself, like, would your body want, if it had an opportunity, would it actually want to date your mind with the way that you maybe treat your body? A lot of us, I think, even like exercise and eat for aesthetic purposes, and maybe less so, how it looks externally, and less so actually how I feel inside about my body. And I don't mean it even like a ooey gooey way. I mean sensorially. Like, do I feel good in my body? Like,
In your body.
does it feel pleasant to be inside of this body that I have?
Right.
Or is it something that I have to constantly kind of fight against and push against? And so in a lot of the somatics work, we're actually aiming for what feels pleasant, what feels even pleasurable, versus how can I like push myself to the nth degree. Yeah, because that sometimes just re-traumatizes or makes things worse for us. So
Yeah. No, I totally get that. And in all of that, how is it for, when we talk about the healing portion of this, like if our body is talking to our brain, apparently my body loves chocolate chip cookies. Just note to self while I'm hearing that.
yeah, yeah.
but in all of that, then how do we sit into I want to phrase this in the right way so that people can really just grasp onto this. But when our when our when we are at war with our own body,
Mhm.
what is a great first step that you feel like folks can take? Because I think there's a lot of people who actually don't enjoy living in their body. I think that happens when I know
Yeah.
people who wake up with chronic pain or live with chronic illness. People who, I mean, I support a whole breast cancer community. So all these young women coming out of my body was just a 20-year-old body, and now I've got scars and I've got implants, or maybe I didn't get implants, but there's
Mhm.
tubes and there's just these feelings. So how do we facilitate helping someone get back into their body and getting to that place where they can feel good in their body again?
I love that question so much. So there's a part of the brain. It's located at the brainstem. It's a network of neurons, and it connects the spinal cord and the brain. And it's called the reticular activating system. And it's essentially like a filtering device for our brain, because our nervous system receives 12 million stimuli per second. And our conscious mind can only receive anywhere from 40 to 50 bits per second. So 12 million to 50 bits is a wild discrepancy. So basically our brain is filtering what is important. What's the important information to me? And we've all experienced this, because anytime that you are about to go buy a car, you start seeing that car everywhere. It's just showing up on the road everywhere. Seemingly no one had that car, now suddenly everyone has it. And that's
Right.
not true. Everyone had the car that had the car. It's just that your brain is now filtering reality for that experience. So this is not to diminish anyone that has chronic fatigue or chronic pain or any of these symptoms, but something that can be a path out or a path in another direction is, what am I searching for? What am I impressing upon my consciousness all the time? And so when it comes to somatic coaching, something that we're seeking is like, even if it's, because you're right, some people it's like, man, nothing feels good in my body. So I'm not looking for pleasant or pleasure. Maybe that's like a pipe dream for some of us, but maybe there are places that feel less painful,
Mm,
like just a little bit
mm,
less pain. And so I can start to tune my nervous system and my thinking in the direction, and my filtering mechanism of my reticular activating system. I can start to tune and filter towards, oh, well, that's a little bit less bad. That's a little bit less bad. Oh, that's neutral. That's actually neutral. That's not bad. It's not good, but it's neutral. Oh, that's actually like, that's a little like fuzzy and feels a little foreign, a little buzzy, and oh, and that actually feels a little bit good. And so there's a spectrum, and we start to move in the direction of what is pleasant. So a lot of it
mhm.
is just, where am I spending more of my time? One of my teachers says we want to give benign neglect towards um, some of these like more difficult or painful things. It's not positive vibes only. I'm not trying to say toxic positivity. give
Sure.
give weight to those things, certainly, but also the world gives us like plenty of horrible things to be thinking about, and like natural disasters and politics and shootings and all the different like things
Right.
that come in most people's consciousness all of the time. So ideally I want to work to balance that out
Mhm.
with sunsets and ocean waves. And for me in Boulder, Colorado, I have the mountains. Like the simple, one
Mhm.
of my teachers says, simple, non-addictive, non-habit forming pleasures. And as you said,
Mm,
I love that you actually called this, Mary, is like, the outside reflects the inside and the inside reflects the outside. So if I can start to become like this is such a, not a great analogy, but like a heat seeking missile for those things outside of me, right? It's like not a great analogy, but if I can start to like be a honing device for the things in my experience that are actually like in the shade, we call it the oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking, but sort of like in a tone of pleasant, that actually starts to, believe it or not, over time change my internal experience.
Sure.
So we talked about this a lot, of course, resources. I don't know if you remember that in the first Mary, but it's like, what are the things that bring me safety, that bring me comfort? That's why like little kiddos have blankies, and they have
Yes.
teddy bears, and they have like, their favorite stuff. Yeah, their favorite stuffed animal. They have like their favorite, maybe like if you're a family that has a furry friend, you have like a dog or a cat or an iguana or whatever you have. Those are things for little kids that are so resourceful. And I think as adults, we think like we're somehow free of that. And it's like, oh, I'm an adult and therefore I don't have any needs. And it's just not true. Like we all
Right.
actually really want comfort. And
Mhm.
so whether like doesn't matter what gender, I think like especially like women are indoctrinated more and more that that's acceptable. But I think for a lot of men, it's like, oh, I have to be strong and hard and I can't like actually have any appreciation for these things in life. But the truth is,
Right.
they really help settle the nervous system. And
Yes.
we didn't even talk about that in the basics of like our nervous system is constantly waving through up and down, up and down, up and down. It's doing these beautiful waves of intensity and de-intensity, or activation and deactivation. And so we need, with how life becomes activating in so many ways, we need to find places and spaces and people and resources that allow us to deactivate. And we need to find those things consistently.
Right.
It's not just like I'll take a 2-week vacation once a year. It's like that. No, that doesn't do it.
Right.
That helps for those
Right.
2 weeks. That's beautiful. But I need to
Yes.
find those things daily.
Right. Right. Yeah, and it's so interesting because it's back to the also what are we feeding ourselves, right? Whether that's
Mhm.
what speaking of heat-seeking missiles, if all we're doing is
Don't love that
watching
analogy, but
the news and there's a constant reinforcement that things in the world are bad, then that's
yeah.
very easy because you're also feeding you're feeding your mind, right? You're feeding your mind, and then now you're feeding what you think about. You're giving it energy to think about those things. Even politics, this is the year where it's
Right.
on all the time. So it's like, what are we feeding ourselves and allowing to show up? My mom was recovering from a little spill in the hospital, and I remember she came back home and they wanted her to just relax, and I was like, Mom, can you turn off the Thai news? Like, number one, you live in America, and I know you might want to like know what's going on back there because it seems like a little bit of a soap opera. And you know what? Like, it's not feeding you anything great because all you're doing is getting angry for the people. And
Yeah.
so, yes, for staying in touch with maybe your roots, but also like for now, the body's healing. Like, invest in something that you love, invest in something funny, something fun, something positive, something beautiful. So you're putting yourself into that frame of mind and those energetics instead of that tenseness that can come with hearing about things
Mhm.
like wars and fighting and politics. So I think there's definitely something to be said for what we allow in, because somewhere it's going out,
100%.
and that may mean energetically as well. With
Yeah.
that, we are going to take a very quick commercial break, and then we were going to come back to this thought, and we're going to have more conversation around it.
Dr. RC will share extraordinary resources and services that promote educational success, as well as making a difference in the lives of all social workers, as well as the lives of children, adolescents, and teens of today. She will have open discussions addressing many of the issues that we face about our youth and how being employed in the uniquely skilled profession of social work for over 18 years has taught invaluable lessons through her personal experiences. She will also provide real-life facts, examples, and personal stories that will confirm that why serving as a child advocate is extremely beneficial when addressing the needs of the whole child. Listen live to Dare to Soar, Saturdays 10 a.m. Eastern on the BBM Global Network, and TuneIn Radio as Dr. RC will provide thought-provoking information that will empower, encourage, and strengthen students, families, and communities across our nation. You can also visit her at soarwithkatie.com. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness: Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, Published by iUniverse, Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals. Listen to John Hawkins' My Strategy, Saturdays, 1 p.m. Eastern on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio.
So before we took the break, we were having a juicy conversation about, inner world reflects the outer world reflects the inner world. Also, if junk goes in, junk will go out. So with
Yeah.
that, we talk about all the different things that folks can do. And in terms of, if someone is scared of birds, they can choose to just go inside as one option. They can also choose to slowly learn to live with the birds, and then maybe they go out there for 5 minutes and then they come back in, realizing that the
Mhm.
birds aren't always going to be in a state of attacking them, and then maybe at some point they're actually able to live with the birds, and they go, look,
Mhm.
the birds are there, they're present, I acknowledge them, and I know I'm safe because of all the times I walk to my car, birds aren't coming down to attack me. So
Yeah.
so as we go through this, I want to talk about the things that maybe you've done in your own life to challenge yourself and to do something different. And one of the things that I noticed, so for those of you that don't know, all of my guests do a little bit of an intake form for me so that I get a little more intel on them that I might not have known. And Matthew here has done 75 hard, not once, y'all, but twice. So Matthew, first off, what made you do it the first time? And then I want to know also what made you do it again?
Oh, well, I love that. Thank you, Mary. I mean, well, so for those who don't know, I guess, because some people might not know what 75 hard is, there was a gentleman, and I'm totally gonna butcher his name's Andy Frisella, I think, and he's a former like military guy, so his background is this very intensive, kind of like grit and confidence and fortitude, endurance kind of stuff, and let's like really push hard. And I had some buddies that were doing it, and I thought, what a fun experiment to get to be in relationship with my body and to do it in a way, because ironically, right, it's called 75 hard, and I think that's
Right.
part of it. Is like there's an intensity to it, and I actually was like, can I do 75 slow and steady? Like, why does it have to be 75
Why does it
hard?
have to be
Like,
hard?
yeah, like why does it have to be hard or intense? And so for me, it was actually how can I build this into a lifestyle for myself over 75 days? It includes you pick a diet of your own choosing. So I mean, it could be pancakes and maple syrup, but the point is that you pick it and you do it for 75 days. So I just chose no gluten and no dairy and like very minimal sugar. I think I pretty much said only like natural sugar. And I was able to do that. And then you do 2 workouts a day, 2 45-minute workouts a day. One of them has to be outside, which is also like a real kicker, especially when you do it in
That
the
is a
winter.
kicker. Oof, okay.
And then you have to do a gallon of water a day, which is insane. It's a lot. That's a lot of water. Here in Boulder, it actually makes more sense because of the altitude. So you
Because
end up
it's
wanting to
dry.
drink that
Yeah,
much water.
right.
And then you do a progress photo every day, and then you have to read 10 pages of a nonfiction book. So it's a lot. It actually becomes almost like a part-time job when you're doing it, because you're like, well, wait, there's another thing I probably need to do today. But the fun part about it for me was that it really taught me not just obviously discipline and gave me some structure to take care of my body and my well-being, but it also gave me an opportunity to I guess approach it in a really nourishing way for my body, that it wasn't like this is good for you, do it, and and it'll feel good on the other end, but really how could I make every single piece of it be a meditation and make it be something that was
Mm.
really feeding and nurturing my whole being. And so that's become a really beautiful thing. And even since, and I've done it twice now with a group of buddies that I've done it with, ever since, it's kind of become a little, I'm not going to say a full way of life, but I can't imagine not drinking a gallon of water a day at this point. And I think
Wow.
there are people that, I know, but you think about it, Mary D, like there are people that have hour-long meditation practices that they've been
Mhm.
doing, or even 2 or 3 hour meditation that they've been doing for 20 years. And it's like, how could you
Mm.
ever do that? And it's because they did something like 75 hard, where they just
Yes.
like committed to something for a certain
Right.
period of time. And hopefully, ideally, made it something that like in some ways felt fun for them. Because I would make it into a little game with myself throughout the 75 days, and then by the end of it, it just kind of sticks. It feels, I don't know how I would do life without this kind of thinking. And so
Got it.
it's been a really special journey for me in being able to do that and getting to observe my nervous system throughout. The first time I did it, I actually saw a naturopath, and he was telling me that I had a lot of inflammation markers
Oh.
because I was doing it the hard way the first time. The second
Ah.
time I did it, when I decided to do it slow and steady, and even towards pretty much when I got those numbers, I was like, okay, we're going to go slow and steady the rest of the way. Still finished it out. And the second time, they tested my numbers and they looked phenomenal. Like all of my inflammation markers
Mm.
went down, actually, which
So
is
good.
such a cool testament to it's, yeah, so much of it is the relationship that we have to the thing that we're doing, whatever it
Yeah.
may be.
Yeah.
So,
And it's so interesting to hear you say that, because I also think that depending on what you consider hard, right? Because the name instigates that it's going to be difficult.
right.
And you know this about me. I love to read. I listen
Yeah.
to both audiobooks and I read books, and I probably spend a minimum of 4 hours a day reading at any given point in time, whether
Wow.
that's driving, before bed. Usually my nighttime routine is I don't watch much TV. It's because my nose is usually in a book or listening to an audiobook. So with that said, I was like, oh, 10 pages? No
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
And then,
Right.
and I these last couple weeks, I started working out twice a day just to get a feel for it. I was like, let's see this,
Uh-huh.
because it's on my vision board this year to complete a 75 hard. As I
No
did a
way.
Oh yeah, I did a 5-day water fast, but I knocked that out in January. So I was like, okay,
Wow.
done. And then 75 hard was kind of the bigger one that was on the board. And I was like, all right, it's
Uh-huh.
May. I got to get started here. And I don't want to be doing it in the middle of winter.
Yeah,
So that was a big
that's
piece of it.
real.
And yeah, and as I've been, playing with it, I was like, "Oh, this feels good." Like one day my indoor, workout activity is a yoga class, and then it's a hike. If I do the block twice, it's about 45 minutes. So I was like, and that's
Yep.
outside. My dog gets to enjoy it with me. Like this can
There you
all
go.
be, we can make this happen. And then I was thinking through the food portion of it too. And I did a stint for a while of like no white flour, no white sugar. And I was like,
Uh-huh.
oh, I like how that feels. Like that feels good. But more than anything, I was loving even more how I feel in my body, because I noticed that just going back to even strength training
Yeah.
was a really big difference for my body responded so quickly. It's like, oh, like my muscles
Mm,
want to be here. Like my body really responds to this. And I was finding the ebb and the flow of like, oh, like my body loves the variety of things. It doesn't love just one thing. It
yes.
loves the variety, and the fact that I've been just giving it that variety on a regular basis has felt really good. And I was like, I can see how some people could actually continue to do some of this. I will say the water is probably the hardest part of it for me. Just from
Totally.
moving around and being around, I have to be really conscious. So I've been waking up. I have a Yeti, looks exactly like yours. It's the same color and everything. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Yes, that's the one. I have that exact
Thank
one.
you for the
And
reminder.
yes, and it's so that's my first morning drink, is just I down that
Yeah.
whole thing with a little bit of salt
Yep.
and I'm ready to go. And I'm like, there's ways to make it happen. And so I think there's these beautiful ways of, like we were talking about, how do we ebb and flow through all these experiences, and what are we perceiving as hard? What's showing up in our lives that we might also be making harder than they really are, and how can we
Mhm.
come into relationship with them? And I think that you giving even the example of 75 hard is such a beautiful way of, explaining that and seeing it and just seeing it through. When it
Yeah.
comes to, I heard your beginning story was around burning out at such a young age. Tell me how that happens, because I think we have a lot of entrepreneurs and young folks on the line, and a lot of us have friends in our circle that we're seeing on that road. Like, what are we doing that we're so motivated to get in there and go all in, but then we tucker out so fast. Like, what were you doing, and what were some of your signals that said, "Hey, you got to make a change here"?
Yeah. Yeah, so I was working for a tech company out of school. It was a company we were building, like the Netflix for optimal living was the idea. And I was head of content curation. I was employee number 5. So and this was early 2000s. And so I was so blessed. I got to work with 200 of the world thought leaders, and everything from, you named this in the intro, everything from neuroscience, productivity, conscious business, conscious parenting, mindfulness and spirituality, health and fitness, you name it. Like, every category under the sun. And I was so committed to it, Mary D. And the
Mm,
interesting thing is that we can create a culture within ourselves, within our organizations, but also within the team. So there's if you look at Ken Wilber's integral theory model, and I don't want to go all the way into that because that's a whole thing, but there's the I, the we, and the it, and then there's also it's as well. But when we have the individual level, we have, again, the team level, like how are we communicating? What's the culture that we're creating here? And then ultimately the systems in our business operations, like you're an operations woman. What are the operations that we have running that are either supporting a healthy culture or creating potential, like, recipe for disaster and for burnout? So I was working at a company that, again, I don't usually name them because the whole culture was like, thank God it's Monday, TGIM. It was such a hustle culture. Trying to think of all the things that we said, but that we had a lot of phrases that were sort of like embedded into, like, let's hustle and grind. And it was,
mm,
let's absolutely work 70 plus hour work weeks. I was crushing Adderall at the time. So
oh,
I was 23 years old. It was really rough. And again, the irony is we were, like, technically trying to make the world a better place through optimal living and thinking
right.
people would binge watch meditation videos, which we've since learned not as much, that people don't necessarily binge watch meditation videos. But yeah, 24 years old, I was working 70 plus hour work weeks. I kept getting these really dizzy, like flu like symptoms. Like, I would just get really
Mm.
dizzy. And here's the kicker, Mary. It was always Friday afternoons. It'd be like
Oh,
as the
oh,
week
no.
was wrapping up. I would get incredibly sick over the weekend, and I would have like a full fever. Um, but then Sunday afternoon would roll around, and I kid you not, I would be like, I think I'm ready to go to work tomorrow. By the time I woke up in the
Wow.
morning, I was like ready to go again. It was so,
Wow.
and so what I later came to realize, after 6 months straight of this, every 2 weeks, this happening. I mean, it wasn't like clockwork, but it seemed like it. It was every 2 weeks, sometimes it was every 3 weeks, sometimes it was every week. Um, and and I just fully burnt out. My adrenals completely gave out at 24 years old,
Mhm.
and I wanted to really understand why my body and my mind were not working together. And so over
Mm,
the last 12, 13, 14, I don't even know how many years now, I've been basically building a PhD in trauma healing, burnout recovery, reading hundreds, similar to you, I've been reading hundreds of academic journals, studies, and books. I mean, I'm a huge, like, geek of that stuff, just like you. Gained the 1,000 hours of yoga teaching certifications, and have studied with all of the leaders, like you mentioned at the top, Peter Levine, Steve Hoskinson, Irene Lyondine, Paul Heller, tons of really eminent names in this field. Because for me, I realized it was in my yoga classes and on long walks that it seemed like I was actually getting my best ideas. But not
mm,
even just like best ideas. It felt like all of me was there.
Ooh, I love that. We're
I
gonna
mean,
we're
like,
gonna we're gonna pause on that. All of you are there because I have some questions for you around this. This is good. This is so good.
okay,
We're
yeah,
gonna go to a quick
okay.
commercial and we'll be right back.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of the Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on the Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐬𝐿, a 3-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a 6-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2 thirds, and 2 fourths. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. 𝐦𝐨𝐧𝐭, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorich has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk on the BBM Global Network.
Welcome back, everyone. So before the break, Matthew was telling us his crazy story about basically being in hustle mode and actually, as his body was winding down for the week, it was like raging against him because, things were winding down. So instead of, I'd say, what most people do, which is look forward to the weekend because they're so busy working during the week, he would work all week and then almost his body would be experiencing withdrawals, knowing that it's going to go into a weekend and be away from the work until Monday rolled around again. So, I think this is such a great example. It's kind of an counterintuitive, I would say, is one of those things because your body at some point has to scream at you and say, this is actually not the way, even though your mind is like, but it feels so good. Are you sure it's not the way? But it feels so great.
Yeah.
It feels so rewarding. So I think it's also a testament to like what reward, what are you what is your brain identifying as a reward? And so clearly there was something in the doing of those things that felt rewarding for you. And I liken it to the people who might, go rock climbing on some crazy safe, like what is it that says that everything about that seems super unsafe, and at the same time there's probably also something very rewarding about being like, well, I lived another day to tell the story. Like what is happening, and that their body is like, hey, I can do that. I can hang from rocks and move along the mountain here. So what would you say is the outside of getting the wake up call from your health, what would be some of the other aha moments that really taught you and how that, like, was it literally just the slow drip of like, oh, like walks are actually where I get inspired, and like when you learn to slow down, right? Because that's where you were going 100 miles an hour, but it was only in the moments of taking the pit stops that you were actually like, oh, how interesting it feels to be back on the ground, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, totally. The language of the body. I mean, there's 5 different ways that the body's talking to us. We have thoughts, we have images, like the mental movies and pictures that show up in my mind. We have behavior or impulse. like just what does my body want to be doing in any given moment. We have emotions, and then we have sensations. Those are the 5 experiences. We call it somatic signature in our program, and it leans very heavily on Peter Levine's work with 𝐦𝐨𝐵𝐵. But we really, like, those are the ways that our body is constantly signaling, trying to flag us down to say, hey, listen, listen, listen. Many of us are very heavily trained in the thought channel. We're very good at thinking. And I was so addicted to the adrenaline rush. Like, I loved the adrenaline rush of these high intensity meetings that we'd have, with some of the smartest people on the planet. So like, I felt like I had to be so on Mary for every single meeting of the day. And it was such a high intensity environment. And again, I loved it until my body told me otherwise. And so my mind thought that it really liked it. But what I like to sometimes liken it to is it's like when we grow up, there's like a faucet that's turned on of information, where again, bottom up, our body is giving us 80% of the information to the brain, saying this is great, this is not great. But at some point, if we stop listening to our body, if we stop taking heeding, honoring its advice, its suggestion, eventually it just, like, the conversation, it just kind of stops giving us the more subtle hints.
Yeah,
It's like,
got
well,
it.
you're not going to listen to me anyways. Like, you're just not even going to listen anyways. So why would I?
Listen
It's
anyway.
kind of like we turn off the faucet
Right.
until, I guess, like, to like move the analogy forward, then until the entire, like, sink just explodes. And that's kind of what happens. Like, there's just so much built up water that's not being, given to the mind here. I don't know if that analogy totally tracks, but right, that eventually it just becomes complete shutdown. And that's what happened for my body. I remember one day I literally, I didn't even think I would tell this story. At the time, I was dating a woman who eventually became my wife. I actually was just waking up first thing in the morning, trying to reach over to my nightstand just to pick up my phone. I'm 24 years old, Mary D.
Wow.
Like, I should have had no issues doing that. I could
Mm,
not pick it up. Like, it was like such a struggle, and I was like almost like crying in, like, the discomfort that my body was in.
wow.
I was not in a good way. And I think, like, a natural inclination or desire would be that my partner would be like, oh, sweetheart, let me get your phone, I'm so sorry. She just started yelling at me, and she was like,
Oh,
I'm so and the thing is,
oh.
Mary, it was done with so much love. She was like, I am so sick of you being
Mhm.
sick. Like, I'm so sick because you're never home, and then when you are home, you are sick,
Mhm.
or you're, like, just saying, "I'm so sorry," and you take me to, like, I'm sorry dinners. And so
Right.
I remember her, and this is the Image channel, right? Like, 'cause I can so vividly see this. I remember her walking out of the apartment, slamming the screen door, which was, like, one of those metal screen doors that they seem to have a lot in San Diego, and it just, like, rattling so hard. And I remember feeling that rattling in my body of, like, she's never gonna come back. Like, literally, that was the,
Oh.
and
Oh,
she like,
wow.
that was the feeling. And I remember immediately reaching for my phone, as, like, with any energy that I had left in me, to check my Chase Bank app so that I could go, like, buy her some more flowers and jewelry and dates to just, like, try to make it up to her. And
Got it.
and I remember seeing $4.83 in my account, and it was because I was spending so much money just trying to say I'm sorry.
Wow.
And that
Wow.
was, I guess that's what you'd call rock bottom. Like,
Yeah.
that was it for me. That was it. Like, that was the very moment. It actually makes me, like, a little emotional. Like, that was the moment that I was like,
Mm.
this has to change. Like, whether it's her or the next person, like, I can't keep doing this to myself and to the people that
Right.
I love.
Totally,
And
totally.
and so that was the moment.
Thank you for sharing that really, really
Yeah.
heartfelt story with us. It's so good. I would love to sit in more of that. And you know what we're going to do, folks, is we have to wrap today because we are out of time.
Ooh.
However, we are doing an extended version with Matthew over at on the Mad Love channel. So you can go to Mad Love Your Life on YouTube and find the extended version there. Don't forget the Mad Loveology retreat coming up June 20th through the 23rd. You can type in podcast as the code for $800 off. All the details you need are at maryd.com. To get in touch with Matthew, just look down into the show notes. We've got all of his information there. He is going to have another cohort coming up, and his special gift for you today, he's going to gift that to one person, is a comp ticket to take that course and that class. Amazing, super generous gift. And head over to @TheMaryD on Instagram. Drop me what you loved most about the show. Tell me what you learned. And on next week's show, we will draw for the winner. And I'm sorry, not next week's, but the week after. We're going to draw for the winner, and we'll announce it there. So you got 2 weeks actually to do this. You're lucky I'm off for the week. And with that, thank you all for being here. Appreciate all of you. Until next time, may abundance always walk beside you. May joy always go before you, and may love always guide you on your path. Thank you for tuning in to today's show. We air live every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Bold Brave TV. We hope to see you back next week. For more ways to connect with my guests, content, programs, and retreats, just head over to www.maryd.com and subscribe. That's MARYDEE.com.